Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the witnesses testifying today. I also appreciate from the President and the Secretary and Chairman the $750 billion DOD request. I hope we can move on that and, appreciate the President putting this idea forward. You can tell that we're all wrestling with it. We're kind of struggling with it. To be honest, it's pretty clear that watching some of your evolutions that you've struggled with it as well and wrestled with it, and I think that's okay. That's what this committee is supposed to be trying to address. General Dunford, your statement on the fact that reform usually comes after some kind of disaster, and we can try to be preemptive or in front of this, actually, I think is a very powerful one. And General Hyten, I think what you're talking about, saying this is going to happen at some time in the future, I think you're probably right about that. My questions actually relate to this issue of timing. And let me give you a concern that I have. It relates to readiness of the entire force. So I commend all of you and everybody else at the Pentagon for working on this readiness. A lot of people forget 2010 to 2016, the Department of Defense budget was cut by 25%. An amount that was almost close to $540 billion, which is an entire DOD budget year. And we all know that readiness plummeted. I chair the subcommittee on readiness, and I've held numerous hearings, and readiness in the force plummeted, period. And what we've all been trying to do, and I commend you and the President and everybody else in this committee and the Chairman, ranking member, is get the readiness of our 5 current services back up to the level that the American people expect from all of us and from all of you. That is a hugely important mission. And here's been one of my overriding concerns with regard to the Space Force. Not that it is not important, not that it might not even be a good idea, but I'm concerned that is it prudent to take on what would be a fairly disruptive element of a new aspect of the services in the United States military when the current 5 services, let's face it, are not up to the level of readiness that they need to be. Do any of you think that we are at the level of readiness that we should be right now? General Dunford?
General, I'll start. No, and as you know,
So isn't that a concern then? I mean, I know you think we can walk and chew gum, but shouldn't we try to get to the level of readiness that we all really think we need, and then turn to this?
Let me tell you how I think about this. I don't look at it's either space or readiness. I actually look at making sure that we have a singular focus on the interdependencies of the joint force on space as a readiness issue. We can generate all of the squadron and battalion readiness we want, and if we're not capable of defending ourselves in space and taking full advantage of space from a command and control and intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance perspective, precision munitions, timing of our systems, if we can't take full advantage of that and we can't protect ourselves in space, battalion and squadron readiness will amount to naught. And so I view this issue actually from my perspective, which is why my evolution on the issue has taken the direction it has, is I actually now have come to much better appreciate as a result of our analytic work the interdependencies on space and the fact that this whole issue of Space Force really is, in my judgment, related to readiness.
So in your professional judgment, which I respect immensely, you do not think this is going to take away what I believe is the most important mission everybody here should be doing, is getting our 5 current services back up to the readiness that are demanded by the American people.
This is, in my judgment, a joint war, whatever direction the committee decides to go, this should be addressed as a joint warfighting readiness issue. That's what it is. It's not an organizational issue. It's a joint warfighting readiness issue.
Let me be a little bit more specific as it relates to a readiness concern. This committee and all of you have made, all of us together, significant progress with regard to building up our nation's missile defense. And Mr. Secretary, you recently said in testimony that was vital. I agree with that. I think the whole committee does. It's been very bipartisan. One of the elements, General Hyten, you have mentioned that's actually critical to our nation's missile defense is having and deploying as soon as possible space-based sensors that can look at both the hypersonics and the ballistic missile threats coming to our nation. I think it's your #1 unfunded requirement that you've mentioned that. Again, I think the committee agrees that that's critical. My understanding is that the space sensor layer system is being shifted from MDA, the Missile Defense Agency, to the Space Development Agency, which hasn't even been stood up yet. General Hyten, doesn't something like that almost automatically, in your mind, indicate that we're going to have a delay in deploying a space-based sensor system, which you and others and we all agree is critical to missile defense, when you're taking it out of the Missile Defense Agency into a new agency that hasn't even been stood up yet? How can that help with regard to readiness on missile defense? I'm very concerned about that topic.
So I think there's a number of interesting observations. I would say that the secretaries to my right will probably have an interesting perspective on where they live. Where I live as a combatant commander, I have a requirement for a space sensor layer that will see the threats that will enable our deterrent and enable our defense.
How quickly can we deploy that?
That's the question, and we need that by the mid-2020s. That's what the threat requirements are showing us, and therefore we have to go fast in order to do that. I've testified in front of this committee before for that issue. We've pushed that. There's so many people that are involved in space now, it makes it difficult. So it was going to be SMC, then the Missile Defense Agency. The Space Development Agency is focused on that. The structure that needs to be, and the Space Development Agency is supposed to look at evolutionary, or revolutionary, not evolutionary concepts. This is a good place for them to do that. They have the right ability to go fast. But the key from a combatant commander perspective is that's my requirement. I need that requirement, and we need it filled by the middle of the next decade.